Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious, what's the scariest thing you've ever experienced? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was about 5 or 6 years old. It was one of my first sleepovers at a friend's, we'll call her Katie's house. I had only been over for a couple hours and everything seemed to be fine. Out of nowhere, Katie's mom, we'll call her Shelly, starts frantically telling us to go to Katie's room. So we do, and she ends up locking us in, her door locked from the outside. We go back to playing, and what feels like 5 minutes later, we start to hear loud rumbling from outside, followed by men screaming. Katie starts freaking out and pulls me in her closet. Once she shut the closet door, she started crying, and by that point, I was crying too, because I had no idea what was going on. I was confused and wanted to go home. We hear the men getting louder and closer, as well as a lot of banging coming from outside the bedroom. Katie and I are freaking out and huddled in the corner of the closet when we hear the door to her room being broken down and someone rummaging through her room trying to find us. I don't remember fully what happened, but the next thing I can remember from that night is Shelly busting out Katie's bedroom window with a frying pan, and there's a big biker-looking dude on the ground. She threw us both through the window and climbed out and told us to just run. We ended up hopping over a bunch of fences and in a random person's house until the police came. Turns out, the men we had heard were Katie's dad and one of his friends. They came to take Katie away from her mom, even though Katie had never met her dad. I couldn't sleep over anywhere again until I was like 10, and the whole thing made me terrified even to go see my own father. Whoa. Great job by that mother realizing the danger, but man, I don't know if any story's gonna top yours, right out of the gate too. Alright. My parents had a very remote fishing cabin in South Texas. One night my parents, aunt, uncle, and I were the closest town of any size a couple hours away, and it turned out to be a pretty late night, so by the time we were heading back to the cabin it was probably around 4 a.m. The cabin was very remote, and it was a chore to navigate the road to it, so we seldom saw anyone come down there. We had these wooden shutters outside to block out the sun, and after everyone had gone to bed, we realized they were still open. Me being the low man on the totem pole, they made me go out to lower them. As I was lowering the last one, I suddenly saw headlights rounding the bend coming toward our house. I ran inside real quick. We thought it was probably just kids looking for a place to hump or someone who launched a boat from our place when we weren't there and they'd be gone soon enough. But the truck drove up, got into the turnaround, we were the last place on the road, and stopped. So my uncle and I walked to the only window on that side of the house. My uncle's truck was way down a hill and he was afraid they might be messing with his truck. The truth was far more concerning. We watched as two men, oblivious that we were there, exited the truck. It was pretty cold out. We'd all been dressed in coats, and it was definitely uncomfortable when I went out to lower the shutters in night clothes. The men were wearing coats, but the two children, a boy and a girl around 6 to 8 maybe, that they ordered out of the truck were only in underwear. They started marching the kids into the woods and what would have been acres upon acres of swamp. One had a club and one had a hammer. We think as best we could tell. Before they could get into the woods, my uncle told my dad to ready the rifle. My uncle's pistol was in the trunk. My uncle pressed the panic function of his truck alarm, and these guys freaked out. They were a couple steps in the woods and bolted out holding the kids, jumped in their truck, and were gone. Before we could even get out the door, and long before we made it to the truck. We tried chasing them for a while, but never saw them again. Drove up to a high point to get some cell reception and call the cops, but never heard anything else. This happened recently. I was up at 2:30 a.m. working and I heard a woman relatively close by start screaming, "No!" over and over again. It went on for about 15 minutes, maybe a bit longer. I called the police and it was so loud that even the operator could hear it through my closed window. As soon as I stepped out my front door to get a better sense of direction, the screaming stopped. The police arrived a few moments later. I think they patrolled the area for a while, but it didn't start again and I haven't heard it since. I have no idea what happened. I was leaving work, coffee shop in a busy shopping center late one night at about 11 p.m. and I noticed a shifty-looking guy not far from my car in the car park. I can't remember what it was about him that looked shifty, but he caught my attention and I remember feeling a rush of adrenaline when I got into my car and locked the door. I set off driving, and a few minutes later I noticed there was a car right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror more closely when we got to a set of lights, and I realized it was him. It freaked me out a bit, but I wasn't particularly scared by this point. I took a bit of a strange route because I was kind of on autopilot and had forgotten that I was meant to be going to my friend's house. I kept checking in my rearview mirror, and he continued to follow me. I changed lanes for no reason as a kind of test, and he changed lanes too. There were barely any other cars on the road. At this point, I started to panic a bit. The guy followed me for the next 10 minutes along the motorway, then down some A roads until I was nearly there. I pulled over and rang my friend to let him know what was going on. He could tell how panicked I was and said he'd wait outside for me. As I pulled into a street, watching my rearview mirror like a hawk and pretty much crying by this point, the guy that had been following me continued down the main road, but stared at my car as he drove past. I was relieved, but obviously super effing shaken. That guy creeped me the F out. I don't know what changed his mind, but he was absolutely following me home that night.
You showed great situational awareness. Great job paying attention, and you kept yourself safe. Nice.
Nearly witnessing my dog get killed. Our neighbors had this beautiful dog who was really friendly. She was a staffy, and my dog was a poodle mix, so very different builds between the two. My dog at the time would always bark and nip her, but she put up with it. We always kept our dog away from her when we could because we didn't want him to annoy her and wanted him to learn how to behave properly around other dogs. One day, I was in the backyard, and our neighbor's dog gets in by jumping over the fence. Usually not a big deal, but our dog was out and ran over and nipped her tail. She was caught off guard and attacked him. She grabbed him around the neck and basically thrashed him around. The noise of the screams and her growls still sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to separate them, but they were moving so fast and I was scared I'd get bit too. I was only 12 or so at the time, so just screamed at my parents, ran over to take them apart. My dog was okay. He was bleeding, but he was ultimately okay. It took me hours to calm down. I was positive I'd watch him get ripped apart. The neighbors were ashamed and offered to have him surrendered to the shelter, but we refused. We knew that our dog had started the fight and that she was defending herself. She was a lovely dog who had never done anything like it before and never did again, until she died a couple years later from old age. My dog now is scared of other dogs, but has gotten better and now behaves a lot better. My dog is my best friend, and seeing him in so much pain was terrifying. Dogfights are awful to witness. There isn't much you can do. I witnessed another one outside the vet this year. Luckily, the small dog who was attacked was okay. But the dog who attacked her was on the way to be surrendered, and the shelter had a policy where aggressive dogs had to be put down. There's so many things they teach you to do in a dogfight, but in the moment it's hard to remember what to do. When I was about 13, me and my friend were walking my dog and two other neighbors' dogs. We walked down Murray Walk as usual, just chatted while the staffy with its lead dragging behind him ran at us and started attacking the dog. I picked up my dog as it was small, but I couldn't pick up the other, and my friend was too big to be picked up. When he came over to me, I put myself in between the two dogs trying to kick the staffy, and my friend was doing the same. When the owner finally appeared, he just grabbed the lead and walked off. He didn't apologize or even acknowledge what his dog had done, even though we were both sobbing and shaking. I was so scared that the dog was going to kill one of the dogs or one of us. My dog was a puppy at the time, and it now takes him a long time to trust new dogs. I was living in Japan in 2011 when the earthquake and tsunami happened. I was in a snow resort in Hokkaido, and the quake shook the place like nothing I've ever felt. Seeing the entire country go into meltdown was so aft. Watching the Fukushima reactor explode live on TV the next day was something I'll never forget. We were 400 kilometers from Fukushima. I called Cathay Pacific to change my flight, quit my job, and flew home to Australia the next day via Hong Kong. Got the F out of there. When I was 9, my alcoholic dad got drunk one time and he started getting in a fight with his girlfriend. He attacked her and she was screaming really loud. I went by my 5-year-old sister to comfort her. My dad's girlfriend eventually ran away to our neighbor's house to call the police. My dad started crying, so I went to check on him and he grabbed a knife and slit his wrist. Then he went to his room and fell on the floor. Our neighbor walked in to take us to her house. The police and ambulance came to my house. I didn't see what happened, but my grandma came to take care of me and my sister to my mom's house, and we started living with her. I remember I was in high school, so my mom woke me up to get ready for the school. Of course, I was so lazy moving like a turtle. Anyway, my room door has glass, but it is frosted glass. I was packing my backpack, and from the mirror in front of the door, I literally saw a silhouette right in front of this glass looking at me. Short black hair and long figure. At the time, we were alone with my mother, so I just froze. I immediately turned back, but the silhouette was gone. I told my mom about it, and of course, she didn't believe me. I'm 29 now. Sometimes I remember this weird situation, and it still creeps me out. Maybe I was too sleepy, but it was a scary experience. Nothing extreme, but one of the weirdest scenarios I found myself in. About a year or so ago, me and my friend were walking to our favorite place to smoke along this long main road not too far from either of our houses. It's dark at the time, but not too late, maybe about 9 to 10ish. There's less cars than normal, but still quite a few. Down the right-hand side of the footpath, there's a series of entrances to walkways which lead to allotments and dog walks, etc. Me being paranoid as always, looks about every so often, and despite the few cars, and me and my friend, the road is deserted. I turn around to look behind me, and all of a sudden there's a man there walking literally about 3 to 4 feet behind us. I can't remember what he looked like, I just know he looked relatively unclean. As soon as I saw him, his presence became very audible. He was sniffing, coughing, and you could hear his shoes dragging along the floor with every step he took, so it makes no sense how he would have not made noise until he got noticed. I obviously was spooked and nudged my pal, telling him to cross over without making it too obvious. You may think the man came from one of the entrances to the footpaths down the side, but the bit we were at was past the last entrance to any path, and beyond the fence was a very steep hill that goes maybe 15 to 20 feet down, so he could not have come from up there. Also, there have been a few instances of people seemingly spawning in down that road, which is very strange. Me and my friend just laugh about it now, although we were both rightfully scared at the time. This, aside from some of the lucid dreams and sleep paralysis that I've had, is the creepiest experience I've had that someone else can recall as well. Flashback to my mother's memory in 2006. My grandmother is on her deathbed, and the night that she passed away, my mother was by her side the entire time. My mother was the child most closest, so she knew she wanted to take care of her mother in her final hours. Just shortly before she left this world, my mother had to go to the restroom, and when she returned, my grandmother was looking at the ceiling. My mother says, "¿Qué estás mirando, mami?" "Mom, what are you looking at?" My grandmother says, "Eres una mierda, you're shit," while staring at the ceiling. My grandmother rarely swore. From my knowledge, she was a very caring woman. I never heard from her or from anybody curse words never came out of her mouth. My mother hypothesized that Satan was trying to bid with my grandmother or something for more time in exchange for her soul, as my mother came from a pretty religious Mexican household. Straightforward to, I think 2017, my aunt, who was mentally challenged, was ready to pass on. She suffered from just low IQ, and my mother was the one who took her in after my grandmother passed away in 2006. At the end of her life, she was in constant pain. I can't remember what the exact diagnosis was. All I know is that in her final 2 to 3 years, it rapidly got way worse, and she was basically immobile. My aunt wasn't exactly the smartest person. She didn't know Spanish. In fact, she would make up Spanish words for common household items. She couldn't even make a cross gesture with her hands when we used to go to Mass on Sundays. But the day before she passed away, she was in the hospital. The priest who normally comes to give communion to the sick people came and was praying over us. In a big group, aunts and uncles. Suddenly, my aunt, with her eyes closed, as I assume everything was painful for her, says, "Vete?" And we're confused, and she's making hand gestures for something to leave. One of my aunts says, "Is she saying, vete sabanas? Go away sheets?" At first, we think she's saying she doesn't want the sheets over her, so we remove the sheets and ask if it's any better. My aunt then says, almost like a yell, but not quite, "No, Satanas." My mother turns to my aunt, who's not sick, and says, "I think she's saying Satan." The more she said it, the more clear it got. She was saying "go away Satan" in Spanish. It puzzled us because her entire life she didn't know Spanish, and we doubt she even knew that was the Spanish word for Satan. This was when my mom told me what she witnessed on the day my grandmother passed away in 2006, and says that she thinks Satan comes to those who are ready to pass and tries to bargain with them in exchange for their soul. Regardless of belief, this is the most out-of-character event witnessed in my family, completely out of character for both my grandmother and my aunt. Woke up one morning and saw a person hiding behind a tree in my front yard. I went outside and asked what was going on, and he told me he was just in a car accident and he was drunk. Saw he was bleeding pretty bad, and I suggested we call for help. He did not want help. I wanted him off my land, so I asked if he needed a lift somewhere. He assured me he only needed to rest a moment, so I went back inside and got my shotgun to sit with on the porch swing while he figured shit out. There's a prison not too far away, so we're weary of strangers at night. Learned the next day, it was just some drunk kid that wrecked his dad's car going too fast. For a while there, I really did think the man was in the bloody clothes with some escaped convict bent on killing my family. Scared the shit out of me.
Finding a person covered in blood hiding behind a tree in your yard is absolutely reason enough to be high on guard.
Was delivering leaflets. It won't reveal which party. Not long before the 2015 general elections took place in the UK. Before I went into people's gardens, I rattled the gates to check if there was a dog. If there was evidence of a dog in the garden, I refused to deliver the leaflets. Pro tip to anybody that doesn't want politics leaflets in their letterbox around election time: have a dog in your garden. There was one big house, which was a massive garden, so I did my usual routine. I rattled the gate to check if there was a dog. I heard no barking, so I presumed there was no dog. So I opened the gate and went up to the drive to pop the leaflet into the letterbox. When I put the leaflet in the letterbox, out of nowhere, this big dog comes out of nowhere barking at me. It sounded it was not pleased to see me either. I immediately went, "Oh, F." Prepared for the worst and was about to offer the dog my leaflets to distract it when, just in time, the owner opened the door. He told his dog to back off, and he saw I was pretty mortified, so he offered me a cup of tea. I refused and just got out of there. Compared to some of the stories on here, this will be nothing. But boy, that dog got my adrenaline going. I was locked out of my dorm once because I violated curfew rules. I wouldn't be let in for another hour. It was around 3 in the morning, so I decided to go to the 7-Eleven nearby to kill time and get some food. For some reason, I decided to take a shortcut by passing through an empty, dimly lit alley where the only buildings are warehouses. When I was just starting to pass through said alley, I passed by a trans woman whose face and makeup looked like the bride in black from the Insidious movies. She was creepy AF, and moments later, after I passed by her, she starts calling me, "Psst," and follows me down to the alley. I calmly walked faster, and when looking back at her, she seemed to have stopped following me, but she still called me. I was a bit relieved when she stopped calling, but I effing booked it out of there when the next "psst" was uttered directly behind me. I hid in the 7-Eleven bathroom for a few minutes before coming out and checking if she followed me there. To my relief, the cashier told me that there was no other customer who went in the store after I arrived. Needless to say, from then on, I was careful not to violate curfew rules.